One-on-one, my conversation with White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders, what she says about the duty to protect life. Healing process. Vice President Mike Pence visits the remains of a Louisiana church destroyed by arsonists. Welcoming the Holy Father. Final preparations are underway in Bulgaria for the Pope's visit. And a seed of unity, what the Holy Father is praying for this month. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, May 3rd, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining me from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Tonight, my wide-ranging one-on-one conversation with White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders. We talk about the administration's commitment to protecting life, the president's legacy in reshaping the judicial landscape, and the new rule aimed at protecting the conscience rights of those in the medical profession. Joining me now from the White House is Press Secretary Sarah Sanders. Sarah, welcome to our broadcast.
Thank you. It's great to be with you, and happy Friday.
Yes, happy Friday. Yesterday, during the National Day of Prayer ceremony in the Rose Garden, President Trump announced a new rule allowing healthcare workers to refuse to participate in abortions on religious grounds. So my question to you is, how can people navigate these tricky waters without being accused of discrimination?
Look, I think there is some difficulty there, but the bottom line is the president wants to do everything he can and everything that his administration has the power to do to protect life. It's one of the fundamentals of our society. It's probably one of the most important parts of who America is that we value life. It sets us apart from the people that don't and the countries that don't. And it is, I think, one of the most sacred duties that the president has. And this is something the president takes extremely seriously. And it's why you've seen him take so many big steps and bold moves in order to do that since he's become president in his administration.
Conscience protections are a part of a sweeping effort by the administration to preserve religious liberty. Earlier this week, the Tennessee House rejected a bill to give faith-based adoption agencies the liberty to choose whether or not to allow LGBTQ adults to adopt children. So what is the president's message for these faith-based adoption agencies?
I think it's the same thing that he said yesterday, and that we have to protect religious liberty, whether it comes to adoption or whether it's about the places of worship. We have to protect religious liberty and religious freedom in this country. It's part of who we are, and it's something that not only do we not want to get away from, but we shouldn't get away from. And it's something we have to embrace, and it's something the president is committed to and will continue to fight for in every facet that he can. And this is just another step furthering his fight for religious liberty.
It's been heartbreaking, I know, for me and for our audience, and probably for you, to watch these recent attacks on churches, synagogues, mosques here and around the world. The vice president today is heading to Louisiana, where black churches were burned by an arsonist. You, I have learned, read this devotional every single day called Take My Heart, O God, written by women. And in it today, it says that our faith does not have walls. Christ's followers cannot be silenced. So what does it say to you that more and more of our sacred spaces are in need of protection?
It's truly, I think, a sad moment, not just for our country, but for the world, that people don't feel safe in the places that they go to worship. We've seen a number of attacks on places of worship over the last year, and it's something that's certainly extremely troubling. But I think it's another reason that we have to embrace our faith even more, because the only way to find comfort in those difficult moments and in horrific tragedy is in the hands of the Creator. And I think that is something that strengthens our faith rather than cheapens it. It's something that drives us closer to God instead of further away. And I think the more that we do that, the better off we'll be as a country and as a global community. And I think that the steps that we're seeing both the president take and the vice president take about calling out these horrific acts and calling them by name and condemning evil, condemning bigotry, condemning hate is something that we have to do and something that we'll continue to do in this administration.
I'd like to move on to some other headlines. The big economic headline today is that unemployment is 3.6%, almost a 50-year low. 263,000 new jobs were created in April. So why are we not seeing more reporting on economic news like this in the mainstream media?
That's a great question. I'd love for us to talk about the economy all day long. It's one of the most important issues that faces our country, and it's one of the reasons that the president's made it such a priority since becoming president. He's put a tremendous amount of focus on creating a friendly job creation environment, on creating real growth, real wage increases by getting rid of regulations through tax cuts. The economy is booming, and you can't deny it. We have seen month after month of continued growth in our economy, and that's due directly to the leadership of this president and the policies that he has put in place. This is another huge month for the economy and another great sign as we move into this next quarter of the year.
There's a lot of partisanship here in Washington, maybe you've noticed. President
to
Trump,
say the least,
opened the National Day of Prayer event yesterday at the White House with prayers for the people of Venezuela and said that the U.S. is there to help. So many have been killed. The economy there is in a free fall. Yet yesterday, Representative Omar, a Democrat from Minnesota, doubled down, blaming the U.S. for this crisis. Tell us what your reaction is to that.
It's unbelievable to think that this crisis is at the hands of the United States. We're trying to help the people of Venezuela. We've stated time and again that we stand with those people. We have worked to get aid, food and water and medicine to the people of Venezuela and help to try to create a place for a peaceful transition of power. Unfortunately, we aren't seeing that take place. Maduro is digging in, but we still want to make sure and keep our focus on the people of Venezuela and making sure that they're getting the life-saving things that they need, whether it's food, water, or medical supplies.
President Trump said yesterday in an interview that there is a tipping point, however, for sending in troops. What is that tipping point?
Look, I'm not going to get into the specifics of the strategy, but I can tell you the president and his team are keeping all options on the table. Ideally, we don't get to a place where military action is required, but as both the president and the Secretary of State and Ambassador Bolton have all stated, the president will do what is required and help to fight for the people of Venezuela and to protect the people of Venezuela as they go through this difficult time.
I want to move on to an interesting poll that shows that 69% of white evangelical Protestants and 44% of white Catholics give the president high marks for doing the job that he's doing as president. And I would just want to say that that 44% number could be a lot higher if he came on to News Nightly. But I want to know how important, got to get the pitch in. How important will the support of the religious community be heading toward 2020?
It's incredibly important because they make up such a large part of the country, and the president's done a lot for this community, not just on the things that we've talked about, but also, and I think one of the biggest legacies that the president will leave behind long after he has left office is the remaking of the judiciary. The president yesterday had his 100th federal judge confirmed to their seat, and this is going to have a generational impact and a very positive one that we are seeing, and particularly at a time when state legislatures as well as the government here in D.C. constantly overreaching and overstepping. You need that last line of defense to uphold the Constitution and the rule of law, and we're going to see that take place in the judicial branch on a number of fronts, I would imagine, over the next 5, 10, 15 years, and having these people that understand and believe and support the Constitution is going to be a real important part of the president's legacy, and I think it's going to be one of the most important things that he does during his time of 8 years in office.
Before we go, I interviewed the American Enterprise president and author Arthur Brooks about his new book called Love Your Enemies. He says that we have to do it by disagreeing better. No contempt, no insults. Do you think that doing that in this political climate will ever be possible? And how does the president respond to something like that? I know he said in the past that, you know, he's got to punch back.
Certainly, I think we can, there are many times where we can disagree better. The president was elected to be a fighter, though, and people expect that when he gets hit, he will hit back. There's a difference between disagreeing better and fighting differently. Certainly, I think we can focus our disagreements more on the policy differences that we have instead of the personal attacks. I think what we've seen over the last 2 years of Democrats and the mainstream media perpetuating a lie and attacking the president and everyone around him day in and day out. Let's not forget the severity of the accusation that they made against the president. They actually called him a traitor to his country. I mean, let that sink in. The sitting president of the United States of America, they called him a traitor to his country and expect him to just sit down and not respond to that and not fight back. That's not disagreeing. That's defending. That's making sure the American people know the truth. On a policy perspective, I think certainly we can focus on the contrast that we have on the issues. But when it comes to making sure that people understand what really happened, I think it's important for the president to push back and to be bold and aggressive in that pushback.
Finally, our photographer, one of our photographers came and brought his daughter to take your child to work day and was lucky enough to get a question with you, but you filibustered. He said, the question was, what's your favorite kind of ice cream? And you said, well, I don't have one, it's 2 scoops. So as a hard-hitting journalist here, I'm going back in for the kill. What's your favorite kind of ice cream?
I thought he was asking me about the president's favorite kind of ice cream, which is why I was a little less quick to answer. If it's mine, I guess I'd have to say probably mint chocolate chip.
Okay, there we go.
But I'm trying to avoid that at all costs these days.
Me too. It's a constant battle, shall we say. Sarah Sanders, White House Press Secretary, thanks so much for joining us.
You bet. Thanks for having me on.
President Trump spoke with Russian President Vladimir Putin over the phone today. They talked about Venezuela, North Korea, and Special Counsel Robert Mueller's Russia report. There's one topic they did not discuss. White House correspondent Mark Irons explains. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. U.S. intelligence shows that Russia did interfere in the 2016 election, but today during this phone call, President Trump says he did not warn Vladimir Putin to stay out of the 2020 elections. Instead, the president shared with reporters what Putin thought of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's report.
We discussed it. He actually sort of smiled when he said something to the effect that it started off as a mountain and it ended up being a mouse, but he knew that because he knew there was no collusion.
Mueller's finding of no conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia is separate from another conclusion in his report that Russia did meddle in the 2016 election. Now, it's possible that the special counsel could testify before Congress. The president says he'll leave that up to Attorney General William Barr. He'll let him make that decision. Now, Barr has said he is not objecting to Mueller's testimony, but at the same time, he does have the power to keep that from happening. Lauren?
White House correspondent Mark Irons from inside the briefing room. Thank you, Mark. Vice President Mike Pence showed his support today in Louisiana for members of 3 black churches burned earlier this year by arsonists. He's scheduled to meet with community leaders and parishioners. A local sheriff's deputy's 21-year-old son has been charged. North Korea is a cancer on the earth, and it will kill all of us if we ignore it. Strong words today from the mother of Otto Warmbier, the American student who died after being detained by the rogue nation. She is in Washington this week, urging American diplomats to keep the pressure on the North Koreans. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reports from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Cindy Warmbier says it's vital the U.S. continue to highlight the plight of American, Japanese, and South Korean hostages abducted by the North Koreans. She compared her son's prison camp in North Korea to an actual concentration camp. I asked her why it's so important she continues to speak out after her son Otto died in 2017.
So this isn't fun, but I have to get the message out. So I do what I need to when I think I need to. You're all wonderful, but, you know, I have a real life, like a normal, everyday life like Otto had. And I will keep talking until there's change, but it's never easy for me.
Cindy Warmbier lending her support to American and Japanese advocates in Washington today. Warmbier joined a delegation from Japan who represents families of victims kidnapped by the North Koreans.
To demand my father's repatriation.
Today, family members spoke about the conditions their loved ones faced in jail and highlighted the country's numerous human rights abuses. Warmbier says her son, Otto, was one of many who lost their lives. He was sentenced to 15 years of hard labor in North Korea after being accused of stealing a propaganda poster while on a tourist trip. He entered a coma while in detention and died at the age of 22 after being returned by plane to the U.S.
The look in his eyes, which I didn't know he was blind at the time, was absolute horror. Horror, like he'd seen the devil, and he had. He was with the devil.
Cindy and her family continue to back bills that will hold North Korea's leader, Kim Jong-un, responsible. Vice Presidential aide Tom Rose says the White House is upping the pressure on the Kim regime. Rose asked advocates like Cindy Warmbier to continue to urge the government to help those who remain in jail.
Pressure needs to stay on us, on our administration, to ensure that we can proceed with negotiations on a critical national security issue. Let's not forget North Korea has nuclear weapons and the ability to deliver them to the United States.
Many Christian advocates also consider North Korea to be the worst persecutor of believers in Jesus Christ. One of those groups, Open Doors USA, says if Christians are discovered, not only are they deported to labor camps as political criminals or even killed on the spot, their families will share in their fate as well. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reporting from the State Department. That was just so painful to hear his mother talk. Thank you, Wyatt. A 7-month truce in northwestern Syria is teetering after Syrian state media report a wave of government and Russian airstrikes. A human rights group says at least 6 people were killed in 11 overnight air raids. State media said the strikes targeted terrorist groups. The UN says the escalation over the last week is gravely concerning. And Afghan Grand Council has ended with a call for peace from the country's president. Ashraf Ghani has asked the Taliban for a ceasefire. He convened the council of more than 3,200 participants to hammer out a common strategy for future negotiations. Coming up, dignity of work and a Catholic plumbing company's message for workers looking for good-paying jobs. And the Pope's prayer intentions for the month of May.
Quiero agradecer a las monjas, los sacerdotes.
The Pope's prayer intention for May, the church in Africa. The Holy Father calls on the faithful to pray that the church there may be the seed of unity among her peoples and a sign of hope for the continent. Blue-collar businesses here in the U.S. are taking a new approach to recruiting, especially for positions with higher salaries that aren't being filled. Take a look at these statistics from the Department of Labor. Many skilled trade jobs pay more than jobs that need a college degree. Power line installers earn around $70,000 a year, aircraft mechanics $65,000, and plumbers and pipe fitters $58,000. Now, during this week, we celebrate St. Joseph the Worker. And correspondent Jason Calvi visits one Catholic family making the trades their trade.
Sparking a new interest in the trades.
After 4 years, you could be a journeyman plumber, and the income you could be making will be close to 6 figures at that point.
Wow, 6 figures?
Yeah.
Tommy O'Connor went to a college prep high school and some college. But then followed his dad into the plumbing business.
But plumbing is also dirty, right? You're dealing with toilets.
It is. It is, but some of that stuff isn't as bad as you think.
The O'Connors are now training the next wave of plumbers, helping them see if this job is the right fit. Claire Murphy is the mother of 3 and a second-year apprentice.
Well, the income potential here is far greater than any other place that I can think of. I've worked outside of this business, this trade. I've worked retail, I've worked restaurant, the service industry. But here you're you're training for a career, not just a job.
The pipeline of plumbing jobs looks very strong right now. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics estimates that by 2026, this industry will see an increase in jobs of 16%. Tommy tells me the trade is seeing a drain. Not enough young people coming in.
I am absolutely proud to be a plumber. I tell people this all the time. It's the best thing that ever happened to me.
And maybe that can spark the next generation to see this as the right fit. In Frederick, Maryland, Jason Calvi, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Jason. I appreciate that piece. What an interesting story. Up next, exploring the role of women in the church. We have analysis from Rome. A leader of women religious around the world says she has her doubts Pope Francis will approve women deacons.
I'm not so sure because I know that Pope Francis speaks quite a bit about women having their place and all this, but we are still kind of waiting. Some things have happened. For example, we've had some places at the synod. We have had 2 synods now.
When the assembly met in 2016, Pope Francis vowed to set up a commission to explore the role of women's deacons in the early church. The commission has finished its work and delivered its report to the Holy Father. There's no word on what he's going to do with it. Dr. Pia De Salini is Chancellor of the Diocese of Orange County and joins us from our Rome Bureau. Welcome back to our broadcast. Pope Francis will address this group of women religious gathered in Rome next Friday, and the issue of the role of women deacons in the early church has gained a lot of media attention. Tell us about the background on that issue, and do you expect the Pope to do anything?
Well, it's a somewhat complicated issue, but put simply, the Greek term in the New Testament for female deacons or deaconesses is very different from the term for deacons. And the term associated with deacons, with male deacons, has always been associated with sacramental ordination. So we're talking about 2 different things, and always have in the history of the Church. The challenge is the church teachings are very clear and well researched, but unfortunately we don't always do the best job of communicating on them. And I think that Pope Francis realized the need to, again, do a deeper study, even though this has taken place many times before, do a deeper study to try and communicate the tradition and the teaching on this matter.
Pia De Salini, the Pope's Council of Cardinal Advisors, have said they are considering how to increase the presence of women in the Vatican. You're a woman in a leadership position in the church here in the U.S. What advice would you give them?
I really think we have to move beyond talking about women in the connotation of a sacramental ordination and that type of role, but rather looking for women professionals and male lay professionals who have the skill set that can serve the church. I'm fortunate to work with several such professionals. Our CFO is one of the best and a woman, and she has a wonderful skill set.
In some ways, Pia, women in the Western world have more influence than ever. How can Catholic women use their Catholic formation to impact our culture?
I think we need to jump into the culture. I think sometimes the conversation is so focused on our roles of leadership in the church that we forget our role in the world at large. And that's really all of the lay people, both men and women, are called to transform the world at large. And we need to jump in every field, the arts, science, politics, every field that's out there. We need to jump in there because that's how we're going to change the world. And frankly, to be honest, I think we're going to do a lot more to change the world there than if we're fighting about who has power in the church.
Dr. Pia De Salini, Chancellor of the Diocese of Orange County in California and theological advisor to the bishop there. Thanks for joining us.
It's great to be with you again, Lauren. Thank you.
Catholics in Bulgaria are getting ready for Pope Francis. This choir is preparing to welcome the Holy Father. The Pope arrives on Sunday and will meet church leaders and deliver a nationally televised speech. Pope Francis will also celebrate Mass with 50,000 people and give First Holy Communion to Catholic children. We will bring you highlights of the trip on Monday's broadcast. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I hope you have a good weekend. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and at Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night, and God bless you.